So I have to tell you, I was calculating how many years I've been involved in the rabbinate, and including my student days, it's going on 40 years. That's hard to imagine, 40 years. But if I've learned anything in those 40 ensuing years, it's that talking about emunah, talking about faith, that's a tricky business. The truth is that many of us are committed to the practices of Yiddishkeit, to Judaism. Those are the holidays and the customs and the sancta, the folkways of our people. But it's really complicated stuff. How do you untie why it is that you do what it is that you do? I think a big part of the complication comes from the fact that just as we mature and grow and develop, so too does our faith. None of us has the same faith that we had when we were younger. At least that's my contention. I still remember, Polly will laugh at this, that we had a professor who taught philosophy at the seminary. His name, Neil Gilman. I don't know if Neil Gilman ever visited Winnipeg. He's a Canadian, by the way, was a Canadian. He was from Montreal, and he visited here. Wonderful. So Neil Gilman, when I was being ordained from the seminary in 1995, asked me to come to his office. I knew I was in trouble. And he spoke to me in Canadian English. He said, I'll speak to my best Canadian English. And I want to say to you that I read your paper. And it's a very, very fine final paper on Jewish philosophy. But I want you to know that I absolutely disagree with every single thing that you said about faith and about philosophy. And then he said, and I hope someday you will outgrow the pediatric notions that you have of Jewish tradition. May he rest in peace. Faith is never linear. It doesn't work in the ways in which we would hope it would work, that you move from one stage to another stage. Despite people like Fowler who talk about stages of faith development, it doesn't work that way. We ping-pong back and forth between what we think and what we feel and what we know to be certain and true. So what do we mean by the concept of believing? And what does it mean to us to be believers? And as I said, it's tough stuff for a whole host of reasons. And most importantly, because, as I've already tried to suggest, it's a moving target. I have to say that as a rabbi, the most wonderful tool that I have is the toolbox itself. The fact is that over the course of time, you put into your toolbox those things that you need to get the job done. I want to share with you a story that happened when I was a rabbi in Tokyo, Japan. Yes, I was Tokyo Rose, for those of you who remember that kind of stuff, right? When we lived in Japan, I was the only game in town. This might be hard to imagine because you already know that when Pluto gets populated with people, there'll already be a Chabad that'll be there, okay, right? But this was before the days that Chabad had not one but two outposts in Tokyo. A whole host of interesting reasons why they didn't go, including the fact that it's on the other side of the international date line. So when is Shabbos and when is Yontif? It's like sort of being in outer space and not knowing where to go. But ultimately, they came as well. When I was living in Japan, a man came to tell me that he was having very difficult dreams and that he was rocked by all kinds of nightmares and terrible feelings internally. And he said that he had reached out to somebody by the name of Rabbi Neil Rose. And Rabbi Neil Rose told him to go find his son, Rabbi Carnie Rose, and that Rabbi Carnie Rose would heal the man. Now, this was 1995 or 1996, long before all the telephone plans that everybody has. So I picked the phone immediately to call my dad, which of course cost me about $25 American. And I said, Abba, you just told this man that I can heal him. And then my dad did exactly this. So nu, heal him. And he hung up the phone. He had a lot of emunah, a lot of faith in me. So what did I do? I took out my talis. I took out my tefillin. I found a shofar. I took out my lulav. It wasn't in such great shape anymore. My hadas, arava, and the etrog. And I sat him in the middle of the bima, and I started walking around the bima 7 times, tooting my horn, blowing the shofar, and singing, Hoshia et amecha, save your people. And the man never came back. But a large donation showed up at the synagogue, and he said, thank you, Rabbi Rose, for healing me. Noach is the protagonist of our particular Torah portion. And usually when I speak about Parashat Noach, and I've done so, as I said, for a good number of years, I start with the question, was Noach a dude or was Noach a dud? Is Noah a good guy or is Noah a not such a good guy? And every year we ping pong back and forth and we suggest that Noah, some years is a good guy, some years is a bad guy. But probably like most every human being, there are good elements and there are bad elements. The question is, what do you want to emphasize in any given year? So you might remember the story of the flood. And over again in the Torah it says, Vayas Noach kasher tziva oto Elohim. Over and over again it says that Noah did exactly as God had commanded. And of course, the Mefarshim say he did exactly what God commanded, no less and no more. He did not knock himself out for the people that he was trying to save. And you remember the rains come. And the Midrash goes on to say that if you look very carefully at the syntax of the Torah, it says that the rains were coming and the rains were coming, but it never mentions that Noah did what? Went into the ark. It's almost as if Noah has to be pushed by the Almighty to make his way into the teva, which will ultimately save his life. Because on some level, Noah did not have emunah, did not have the faith that was necessary in order to follow punctiliously what it is that God said, because he doubted in his heart of hearts that God would be able to save the people if God decided to bring a flood. It's as if God could not create a rock, or could create a rock that was too heavy for God to lift. Those of you who studied philosophy, that's the classic question. Can God create a rock that is too heavy for God to create? The question is, did Noah believe? Did he have the emunah that was necessary? I want you to know that Rashi, the greatest of the biblical exegetes, and he quotes many, many midrashim. Almost nothing that Rashi says is his own. He is the channeler of ideas that came before him and many that have subsequently come into our possession over the course of time. And Rashi says that Noah did not have emunah shelema. He did not have a perfect and untainted faith. That might surprise you. Ish tzaddik haya bedorotav. He was a tzaddik. He was a great man in his generation, and he didn't have the necessary faith. And so the commentaries go on to suggest that faith is not something that's built in a moment, but rather over the course of a lifetime. It is like a good marriage. When it lasts for a long time, it requires that you don't make it disposable every single time you have a fight. Can you imagine that every single time that you are disappointed or unhappy or confused by the behavior of your spouse, your partner, that you simply said, that's it, I'm done. I'm out of here. Not many marriages would last, and most of us would be, I guess, single or searching. You finally got it. It's good. So the truth of the matter is that Noach was not a perfect person. But Noach was a questing person. Noach was a searching person. Noah was a person who was looking for manoach. He was looking for somewhere to hang his proverbial hat, somewhere to hang his proverbial spirit, somewhere to find the comfort that he was looking for. And you know, the truth of the matter is that one has to have a lot of emunah, a lot of faith to believe that one will find those things in the world. I don't want to ask you to raise your hand, but how many of us have a best friend? How many have somebody who is a confidant? Somebody that we can turn to and talk with and share what's in our hearts and in our minds, in our spirits, even in the most difficult and dark times. Noah was a person in search of all of those kinds of things. And the tragedy of Noah is not the flood, but the tragedy of Noah and the story of Noah is that he was boded. He was on his own without support. He was the only person in his generation who was righteous. He had nobody to commiserate with and nobody to talk to. I don't know if you remember the end of the Noah story, because most of us sort of end it where we finish the part about the animals coming in by twosy-woozies, elephants and kangaroosies, you know. That's sort of the depth of the Judaic knowledge that we have around these issues. But if you follow the story very carefully, what happens? Noah plants a vineyard. And what does he do? He gets himself, as they used to say in the North End, drunk like a skunk. He gets completely inebriated. And anybody who has had any counseling themselves or has dispensed any counseling can tell you exactly what's happening here. Noah is self-medicating. Noah is trying to close his eyes from the terrible dreams and the terrible guilt that he felt listening to all the people who were not in the ark dying. Can you imagine what it was like on the outside of that ark as the waters reached the knees and the thighs and the stomachs and the heads and the noses of those people and the sounds and the screaming? And what did Noah do? Noah went inside the ark. It says so in the Torah. He closed his eyes to the suffering of the people on the outside, to the screams of those who called out to him and said, Hatzil oti, save me from this mabul, from this deluge, which will sweep us all away. You see, my friends, the lesson of Noah and the flood is a lesson that we must learn, and we must learn it quickly, my friends. If we close our eyes, close our ears, shut off our hearts to the world at large, and not just to the people who populate the earth, but to the earth itself, which at this moment in time, as we have seen, particularly this past summer, do you remember the smog? Do you remember the fires? Do you remember what was going on in our planet? In so many ways, we have placed ourselves in a perilous position from which there will be no return if we do not take up the mantle of responsibility and make the changes that need to be made. We love the story of the rainbow in the sky as the promise that God will never destroy the earth again. But if you read the Torah very carefully, it says God will never destroy the earth again. What it does not say is that humanity will never destroy the earth. As we gather together on this Shabbat, I want for us to think very carefully about what we're going to do in the next few days in front of us. You get to the end of Shabbos to decide, okay? How are we going to change our lives? What practices are we going to bring into our reality? What kind of consciousness are we going to raise within ourselves and within our community? You can start simply. You can recycle and renew and reuse. You can make sure to turn your thermostat down, or I guess now it's up a little bit, a little less. Keep it a little colder or keep it a little warmer, whatever the season is. Don't use the resources that are available to you simply because you can. One of the things that we're trying to do now, first of all, we got an electric car. Boy, it's a lot of fun, okay? But we try really hard not to use both of our cars. We try not to do it because it's a simple way in which to conserve and to say, even though it might be a little bit more convenient to do so, we're not going to use the energy that's out there because we need to preserve it. Le'ovda ve'leshomra, to make sure that our children and our grandchildren, our great-grandchildren, have the blessed earth which the Lord has created. Let us not shirk from our responsibilities. Let us not hide from the realities that are facing us. And let us be brave so that future generations will say, those individuals brought Manoach. Those people brought peace of mind, comfort, and consolation to the world at a time when it was on fire. They put out the fires and they reversed the course so that humanity will continue to flourish on the wonderful green earth which God has given us. And let us say together, Amen. Shabbat Shalom.